From a 6-day hostage situation inside a bank to turning into a full-fledged psychological phenomenon, today is all about Stockholm Syndrome. Hi, this August 23rd on Behind the Date, we are diving into the Swedish bank heist that went on to birth the term Stockholm Syndrome. From diving deep into the heist and revealing untold secrets of the hostages, this video is going to leave you confused about how your brain thinks. And before we get into all that confusing, mind-boggling stuff, make sure you hit that like button for this video. On the 23rd of August 1973, the convict Jan-Erik Olsson fired a machine gun into one of the largest banks in Stockholm. He took 4 employees hostage during this robbery. Those were Birgitta Lundblad, Elizabeth Aldrin, Kristen Enmark, and Sven Smastorm. Olsson wasn't looking to rob the bank, but instead wanted a convicted friend of his released. Olsson demanded the release of his friend and the convicted armed robber, Clark Olofsson. But of course, that wasn't all. He also asked for 3 million kronor, 2 pistols, and a getaway car. And mind you, Olsson had it all planned out. He was counting on 2 reasons for his plan to come true and for the authorities to give in. The first one was that the Swedish people's strong avoidance of any kind of violence. And the second was the ongoing election campaign. You see, when there's a political campaign going on, politicians will go to any extent to avoid violence and any kind of hurt to their citizens. The police did go ahead and release his friend, but not the money or the getaway car. And this didn't happen in an instant. The hostages were held for 6 whole days in the bank's vault, but when they were released, none of them ready to speak against Olsson. Nils Behi wrote, a Swedish criminologist, analyzed the victim's reactions throughout his entire situation. He described that the hostages were not just unwilling to speak against the criminal, but were empathetic and understanding towards him. Even when they were held hostage, they seemed to think that Olsson was kind, just because he let them walk around the floor of the bank, despite having a rope around their necks. Another hostage mentioned the feeling of a sense of gratitude towards Olsson. This is because Olsson had threatened to shoot him, but he also mentioned that he would allow the hostages to get drunk first. And you won't believe what happened when the police finally caught the convict and rescued the hostages. They hugged, kissed, and shook hands just before the police finally got them all out. In fact, 2 of the hostages also cried and asked the police not to hurt Olsson because he didn't harm them. What about Olsson? Was he a really charming guy or some superbly persuasive person? How did he manage to make the hostages feel so empathetic? In an interview after Olsson was caught, he talked about how the failure of the entire situation was the hostages' fault. He said that they easily kept agreeing to do everything he told them to. He didn't fight them, they didn't fight back, and that made it harder to kill them. One of the exact lines he said was that the hostages, and I quote, made us go on living together day after day like goats in that filth. There was nothing to do but get to know each other. I know it sounds like these hostages shut off their brains, but this is exactly how the Stockholm Syndrome works. The criminologist Nils Behi wrote also mentioned that the captives were basically brainwashed. He first termed the entire phenomenon as the Norrmalmstorg syndrome because it took place in the Norrmalmstorg square. But the name Stockholm Syndrome picked up and it became prevalent. Stockholm Syndrome can really do the trick on your mind. The power imbalance in the hostage situation makes it easy for the captive and the captor to form an emotional bond. And the emotional bond between Olsson and his hostages is weirdly worth mentioning. Even after Olsson was put back in prison, the hostages visited his jailhouse. Yes, they visited him in jail. Olsson was released after 10 years and began a whole new life for himself in Thailand. He built a family, operated his own little car repair shop, and actually openly apologized for the hostage situation too. Progress on his end is good, but it can never change the situation that the hostages went through and how it most certainly altered their life forever. People with Stockholm Syndrome build sympathy towards their kidnapper, but guess who nobody can ever feel sympathy for? Mosquitoes. Yes, Those annoying little blood-sucking devils. I hate them. They are actually responsible for over half the human deaths in the last 200,000 years. And if you hate them too, check out this next video on World Mosquito Day. Subscribe to Behind the Date and stay tuned for more captivating stories, mind-boggling facts, and insane adventures. Let's quench your curiosity and make every day exciting and extraordinary. I'll see you in Mosquito Land.